Good afternoon. My dear friends, I thought it would be nice to tell you Jeju terrible epidemic which in the 14th century devastated Europe, taking 25 to 50 million people. According to different estimates, it is of course about the Black Death of the plague which hit the continent for 71353, but about all under the order. The theme, generally speaking, of course sad. I don't know, I guess that's so funny. This is roller, yeah. Look guys, they do a good transmission, but sometimes too lightly suited to the things that really left a terrible memory. About a century after a while, the world goes black. Salon DS Black Death is devoted to this plague. Went for a long time. It was believed that the plague came to us from the east, where it is a question challenging. Some wrote that it originated in the depths of Asia, somewhere India, on the expanses around the sunny city with Painagar in Kashmir. From there slowly crawled to the side. Like others talked about the fact that there is no homeland. Plague is China, where 1330 years did some terrible floods, pestilence and plagues and famines, other disasters, which marked the beginning of the end of the great Mongol Yuan dynasty. But modern historians do not confirm, not Indian, not Chinese version. The Chinese think that there was the sea, famines, and all the riots, but the Black Death is not relevant. Then historians, they began to talk about the fact that the plague originated somewhere on the outskirts of the Gobi connection with climate change, which in the 14th century was even colder than the steppe. 13 rodents began to huddle to the human village and brought with it a monstrous block, amazed by this harmful bacteria, which is called there and pestis, honor of its discoverer from the Mongolian deserts plague along the Silk Road. Along with troops and convoys moved back. Mongolian version is also not confirmed today. She seriously considered the most popular today the story of the origin of the Black Death from somewhere in the area of Lake Issyk, where it was found quite a number of graves, 1340s, who were buried. Nestorians, local nomads of the Christian religion, and in particular, there is this grave where is it written that here lies so-and-so and his wife died of the plague. But dispute these could go on indefinitely until the case was not conducted genetics. And here then the scientists found that the epidemic of the Black Death caused by bacteria 1 stamp, which is found in the Volga region of Kazan in Tatarstan, near the town of Hill in the village Leishivo. And there found the ancestor of all the strains of the Black Death. And hence the provisions of plague went to Europe. Tatars, children of Hell, Arta, and, but how? Beautiful version that was picked up immediately by the European media and spread widely in the popular edition of And today is the most scientifically proven, since genetic analysis is still not the analysis of the messages of the ancient chronicles, were often the symptoms of plague or rewritten from ancient hands. All or generally described, very general and difficult to specify. What is this option? Plague microbiology, and quite possibly tomorrow will be a new genetic analysis which will lead ancestors Leishiv sky bacteria somewhere far to the east in the desert, maybe to the same Issyk, have not excluded. But while you are barking, and so the plague was born somewhere in the east, and the first manifestation of it recorded in 1347, to put even the in 1346 into Posse, according to the Russian chronicle, which however was made 150 years after the events. Shaved morph strong under the eastern country in Norhuzai. Urgent Yango stroking is Astrakhan on Barn Nobby here and at other castles in those countries. But Besermony on Tatars and Armenians for lunch, the mill on the Cherkasy, like there was anyone to bury them. And it's a record recorded in 1497, but apparently the original source catalepsy goes back centuries, perhaps to the 14th century, but nevertheless still rather later rarity. Who are Armenians? And the Armenian, well, it's a phrase. It franks in this case the resident Italian colonies of the Crimea, Cherkasy, respectively. But it Cherkasov, who not only called Ukrainians call of Cherkasy, probably still those who Caucasians devastated a maze, destroyed her with the plague of the city, of the golden horde, of the phenomenon unique and in need of explanation. I will definitely do a video on this awesome country in our state. And the golden horde alloys shopping, urban culture, vulgar calf mass nomads of the steppes, which was no longer anywhere in the world, but this is a separate issue of the city was struck and devastated plague, and here 1346. Plague came to Crimea. There is a beautiful legend about the fact that Hun Jonabek was besieging Genoa's fortress of Koffa and desperate to take it by storm, ordered to transfer from the catapult, who died from the plague warrior. Right in Genoa, a city of this started winning the plague, devastated Europe. Genoa's gets it in the panic to escape to their ships, sailed in all directions, passing the bowl around the world. Beautiful lay Genoa's fortress of Koffa, and desperate to take it by storm, ordered to transfer from the catapult, who died from the plague warrior. Right in Genoa, a city of this started winning the plague, devastated Europe. Genoa's gets it in the panic to escape to their ships, sailed in all directions, passing the bowl around the world. Beautiful lay month to delay the infestation of their city. The Venetians first in Europe, starting strict quarantine measures, restricting movement, have banned foreign ships to join the Venetian port. They were sent to this island, quarantine on there, and held for a long time until it became clear that they are not loaded, and hence the name quarantine. For some time courageously resist disease. However, as today, the quarantine was not the cure from the disease. He only helped to prevent the spread of pulling the onset of the disease. The Venetians were unable to prevent, and eventually up to 60% of the population, Venice again, probably a bit exaggerated, according, died from the Black Death in Avignon, then the papal capital. The plague initially hid, but when one night died 700 monks in one of the monasteries of the city was struck by panic. People just began to flee. The Pope had to bless and to be sprinkled with holy water Rhone River, on which a continuous stream of floating corpses, residents, the plague-stricken towns and villages, have simply dropped dead in the water without thinking about what they thus spreading the disease. Avignon has suffered enormous human losing, died there. And muse of Patriarch Laura in Sicily, the Sicilian Duke, as it was called, cowardly Duke Giovanni Grande father, even trying to escape from the plague, hiding in the fortified Alpine castle, but there it spread, and he died from terrible boils on the third day. After intrusion, plague went through all of Earthsia. Spain died King Alfonso XI, besieging Gibraltar in Paris, where she came in 1348 June. The Queen, greedy gimp Jean of Burgundy, in the morning went to a mass. Someone coughed in the back row at noon. Jean the Lame was already sick with the plague, and in 3 days she burned the 100 Years' War between the British and the French. And the English King Edward III, learning about the disaster struck the continent, has led to strict measures to stop the message across the English Channel and seeing the quarantine, but the medieval understanding of the course of this word in the territory of the army. Nevertheless, however, on the 7th of July 1348 in town was called, briefly entered the ship for the fishermen on board, and with the dead, and went plague. Edward resisted until the end of the summer. He stopped the trade, was attributed to suppress communication between cities, was told to fumigate the city. Juniper smoke spent prayers and processions, but to stop the spread of the disease could not. In the end of the summer, Edward III broke down and fled from London in one of his country estates, dismissing the preliminary British Parliament. After King ran away from the highest church leadership, that has caused riots of citizens who have come to church to pray to God for forgiveness and have not seen their pastors. One of them was caught in a nearby monasteries and killed at about, as well as did Russian in 1771 in Moscow, when the plague excited the crowd with something, decided that the archbishop wants to plunder the treasury of the Virgin, went to catch him in the monasteries, caught the old man and torn to pieces. Will then be had to suppress guns Edward III forces to suppress the rebellion. And it was not because his soldiers too was sick. They brought with them from France the rich goods, including clothes French ladies. As they wrote that in England no woman who was not wearing a French dress. And with the dress they brought plague and fleas. That was the long version. Time existed including in the about the Black Death depopulated London. 2/3 of the population died today, but this version disputed turns all interesting picture. That the plague is different in different places in Europe. The fact that 3 types of plague are all descended from a common ancestor, which calculated that the microorganisms which were found in the Tatar Lashavo here, the Warsaw bacterium, is the ancestor of all European and but then, when it did spread, the plague bacterium has mutated and we meet the 3 types of plague. And plague, peptic plague, bubonic plague, lung pneumonic plague was transmitted. Like the flu is airborne and it she then 1352 comes to Russia. It is a parasite of Andrew, she is a parasite Scandinavia and all with this question. And the representatives of the field microbiology that it was the species encountered in the course. The spread of contagion in Europe like any other pathogen plague bacillus changed fairly quickly, while losing considered as his the development of its destructive properties. But at the first stage, we see that the mortality and the speed of propagation only increase because the bubonic plague, which came to the south, she has left some of their patients to survive. But pneumonic plague, almost 100% mortality, was and that pneumonic plague prevailed in the second phase of development disease. It struck northern Europe, it came to Russia. So we see that this bacterium, their pathogenic properties, only intensified. The house came the message that the coronavirus also changes on the spread of the world, and that some its variants pathogenicity has only intensified, perhaps by mutation plague bacteria. Due to the surprise of many researchers, circumstances the spread of plague in Europe in the 14th century, the fact that this is the heirs died and there was no one left in brother Andrew died Russia. The plague devastated no less than European countries and only at the end of 1352 years ago, maybe even at the beginning of 1353. The plague rolled down, as they said, in the steppe and disappeared there. It circled the entire European continent in a huge circle, rolling out at least 25 million people. According to maximum estimates, this number may be twice as many, causing enormous consequences for the social, economic, and political history of Europe. In particular, one of the consequences was that the price of labor and the surviving commoners entered the golden age when they were not trained in anything, and the servants demanded 3 times more pay than the cottage. We asked for highly skilled craftsmen who were skilled in their craft, and this was the case throughout Europe. In England it was documented, but it was also in Germany, France, and Russia. Irritated workers, people began to live better. It happens strangely in this way. But what to do is the plague, unlike war, does not kill the best, it kills everyone, and to a greater extent the weak, the poor, the frail, the sick, who are so weakened and brainless because they have a brain that helps them hide from the disease. Fools do not go there to kiss an icon with infected lips. Struck by this, the plague brought changes, even in the political situation, because to a lesser extent it affected Lithuania, for example, and there came a brief moment of Lithuanian great power in Eastern Europe, when Algiert and his troops did not meet resistance in all directions, spreading Greater Lithuania from sea to sea, defeating Tatars weakened by the plague near the Blue Waters. Many of the scary scenes describing the epidemic of human behavior are exactly the same as we see today. Thank God that the coronavirus is not a plague. When some were scared and hid, some on the contrary were given to revelry, hence the famous expression feast. During plague supposedly still all die in the end. Let's at least have fun and share debauchery other through the most rampant looting and crimes. And there was no one to stop them because law enforcement quotes Police and soldiers, of course, they do HP walk mist-plagued. It was inconsistent actions of the authorities who did not know how to protect his people from the divine punishment of absolute powerlessness. Medieval medicine, that medieval plague doctor. What he's wearing the mask of the special in nose full of fragrant herbs, believed that it passes through these herb air is cleared from the noisy miasma. No one suspected that the plague may to be a part of fleas. At the flea bites no one paid attention, because people were living with fleas constantly. It was dirty and medieval rubbish lying on the streets of European cities until, while some king fainted opening the windows of his palace, as Philippe Auguste Paris, he opened up the windows, the passing carts, such a stench rose, explosion residues, decomposed waste. But we have the king's choice, and then he was ordered to clear the streets of the city. For some time they poured on my brand on the street. The blood from the battle flowed directly into channels, accurate and then to sea, where it all took drinking water. Medical knowledge was very primitive. And remember that before the autopsy was still probably 200 years old, if not more, respectively, has been presented as arranged inside the human body, why it affected one way or another illness, else thought that it was transmitted by contaminated air, miasma. From tried this air is clean. The doctors who fought and what was revealed the buboes were applied to them in a human, to give the symbol of the plague for myself. Those were the methods of treatment. Of course, they did not help patches, all sorts pepper. But it is very expensive. It was only for the rich, so plastic it from DEMA imposed on a person to delay light from drugs naturally. This only aggravates the situation of the patient, but in general, doctors don't so much was treated, much contributed to the spread of infection, and were killed en masse in Italy. One of the doctors who left notes on how the plague happened. He did not survive the disease himself, got infected and he died, but survived. A note today are a valuable historical source, so pneumonic plague, her salvation actually wasn't so. Mortality was especially high in Northern Europe. If I tell you that Bremen was abandoned and boarded up, the last for surviving gate of the city, why, if you were like, probably from a purely human desperate to close the door. So it's the same version is about Smolensk. 12 The last survivors of Smolensk or Smolium went out the gates of their city, shut themselves up, boarded up and went wherever we looked, whether we were walking and spreading the infection from our lost city in Great Russia. However, I must say that I saw enough quickly enough after that. My role and importance as large shopping centers and my political ones recovered so quickly enough, despite the heavy losses. Novgorod did not survive the Euro in principle. Why it survived, it goes without saying that the Black Death was an apocalyptic disaster, and the first thing Europeans thought about was that the end of the world had come, because it says in Revelation,